You are now listening to Macrodose.
Hello and welcome to Macrodose, a podcast hosted by me, James Meadway, that brings you your weekly fix of everything economics in a quick 15-minute roundup. In today's episode, we'll be looking at, first, a bank that holds an unconventional asset has come a cropper with rising temperatures. Second, the growing commercial opportunity for new freight routes due to melting ice in the Arctic. And third, data centers are struggling to keep up with the demands of AI training. Our first story this week starts with a bank in northern Italy that holds cheese in its vaults. Credem's vault near Parma lends against wheels of Parmigiano Reggiano as collateral. Producers deposit the cheese, borrow against it, and pay down the loan as the wheels age. This year, the heat is straining the model. Milk yields are down as cows eat and produce less in the heat, and the aging rooms, built for a stable climate, are burning far more power to hold their temperature and humidity. A spokesperson for the bank, speaking to CBS News, described the bank as the Fort Knox of cheese, adding this: "Instead of gold bars, you have gold wheels. Every wheel is €700. Outside, the temperature is very high, and so we need a lot of energy to maintain the humidity and temperature for the cheese." This is climate change threatening financial stability in the most direct way possible. But as Europe withers under its fifth heat wave this summer, the feedback from physical impacts of climate change to financial effects is getting shorter and shorter. Last Thursday, the Romanian military finished blasting rock from the bed of the Danube and sank 4 barges loaded with rubble near the Bala Canal, building an underwater wall to push water back towards the cooling intakes at Cernavodă, the nuclear power plant that supplies a fifth of Romania's electricity, and which had already lost one of its 2 reactors to low water the week before. The government has declared a nationwide energy alert for August, negotiating emergency imports from Ukraine and asking households to cut consumption between 7 p.m. and 11 p.m. At Kaub, the shallowest point on the Rhine's route into southern Germany and Switzerland, the gauge fell to 21 centimetres this month, the lowest since records began in 1880, and is expected to drop below 10 centimetres, effectively splitting the river in 2. Barges are already running at 20 to 30% of normal load. Duisburg reports vessel loading down to a third, with port calls up 50 to 60% as cargo splits across more trips. Freight rates between Karlsruhe and the Antwerp, Amsterdam and Rotterdam ports hit €200 a tonne this month, against a previous record of €130 in 2022. ThyssenKrupp and BASF are shifting to shallow draft vessels, road and rail. These supply shocks at single points in the system then become system-wide impacts. ING Bank puts the Rhine disruption at 0.3 points off German GDP. MBH Bank estimates 0.1 points of Hungarian GDP for every week the Pax nuclear plant stays offline. Allianz puts the June heatwave alone at 0.3 points off European output. Meanwhile, France's Growers Association, Légumes de France, says tens of millions of euros of carrots, garlic and onions have been lost to the heat. Spain's Agriculture Ministry has cut its 2026 grain forecast from 24 million tonnes to 18.5 million. Olive oil, whose price remains high after the 2022 drought, is expected to rise again this autumn as groves in Greece, Italy and Portugal take fire and heat damage. And finally, Oxford Economics puts the pure weather effect at up to a point of food inflation next year, taking Eurozone food inflation towards 3% in 2027. This is where the environmental shock becomes a perverse monetary response. The European Central Bank raised rates in June in response to the Middle East energy shock. It was the first rise in 3 years, up to 2.25%, and held in July with the headline inflation projected at 3% this year. This rise was deeply stupid. Raising interest rates will not stop the sun shining or make rain fall. And low interest rates are essential to help reduce the costs of the investment now urgently needed to make farming more resilient and pay for the costs of adapting to more frequent heat waves in our urban areas. On top of this, lower output means lower tax revenue and wider government deficits. Alliance estimates a lost output could cut tax revenue by 1.8% in France and around 1.3% in Italy and Spain. Looking ahead, A continent already heavily freighted with debt from the succession of crises since 2008 is now likely to pile on yet more. At some point, the willingness of markets to meet demands for more borrowing will turn sour for one country or another in Europe, at which point a more generalized debt crisis might emerge. So is this the approaching climate Minsky moment, the point where a climate shock becomes a financial crisis? Well, not yet. It's slower and duller than that, the steady conversion of the failures to reduce climate change and now failures to adapt to climate change that turn into a permanently higher rate of inflation and permanently higher government borrowing. And that, in turn, will make adapting to climate change harder and more costly, creating a terrible doom loop for the whole continent. To escape that, a radical break with the existing system will be necessary. Our second story this week is a graphic example of climate change reshaping economic activity in real time. It's a container ship skipping the Suez Canal for the Arctic. Sea Legend, a Chinese carrier, this week launches the first scheduled container service through the Arctic, branded inevitably the Ice Silk Road. The weekly run from Ningbo in China to Felixstowe skirts the North Russian coast and cuts the usual 40-day voyage roughly in half, depending on conditions. It follows a record 23 transits of the Northern Sea route last summer, up from 15 in 2024, as melting ice widens the window in which vessels can pass without icebreaker support. This has been building for a while, as we covered on Macrodose in the past. In September 2024, the Panamax container ship Flying Fish 1, then the largest vessel to attempt the crossing, sailed the route unescorted between St. Petersburg and China as an experiment by its Hong Kong owner, EZ SafeTrans. A year later, the same ship, rebranded Istanbul Bridge and now under Sea Legend's flag, ran the first liner-type Arctic crossing between China and the UK, reaching Felixstowe in 20 days. This week's launch turns that single voyage into a weekly schedule. A 2021 study modelling Arctic ice loss under standard climate scenarios put full, year-round, ice-free navigation on the route as far off as 2040. Commercial shipping is arriving considerably faster than the forecast assumed. The savings on fuel burn can be huge, thanks to the shorter sailing times. One estimate suggests that Flying Fish's journey saved $147,000 in fuel. Chinese shipper COSCO's 2021 Arctic shipping pilot program suggested even bigger savings of over $643,000 per round trip. But the physical risk remains real. Peak Arctic sea ice fell 5.8% between 2024 and 2025, the sharpest one-year drop on record, according to a University of Southampton study, before recovering slightly this year to still leave the second lowest extent ever measured. That's not a steady retreat, but a thinning, increasingly unpredictable ice pack, which is worse for navigation than smooth decline would be. Alliance counts more than 500 Arctic shipping incidents over the past decade, nearly half of them machinery failure, in water with almost no search and rescue capacity, and where GPS itself can fail. Nor can the route yet be used all year round, and icebreaker escorts are still required. But the spur to rapid opening is geopolitical. Houthi forces attacked two Saudi tankers in the Red Sea on the 23rd of July, sending oil back above $100 a barrel and reviving the threat to Bab el-Mandab, the choke point most Asia-Europe container traffic has to pass. Orders for ice-class vessels hit a decade high last year, with 167 built and a further 164 due this year, according to Vesson Nautical. The route remains Russian-administered. The Northern Sea route is carved into 28 sections with passage permits issued by the Rosatom-controlled NSR authority, which is why most Western carriers have kept away. Maersk sent one container ship through in 2018 and never repeated it. Most other European lines have pledged not to use the route at all, citing both the Arctic ecosystem and relations with Russia. I wrote for Novara Media in 2022 about the collapse of the Arctic Council after Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the resource competition that retreating ice was opening up between states with no functioning forum left to manage it. Sea Legend is a commercial footnote to that story, a Chinese carrier with no such political constraint, normalizing transit on a route Russia controls the permitting for. None of that is stopping the commercial logic. A route that shaves 3 weeks off a China-Europe sailing, avoids Houthi missiles, sidesteps Suez congestion, and now has scheduled capacity rather than one-off transits is a route that starts pricing itself into freight contracts, whether or not the insurance and rescue infrastructure has caught up. Geography that used to be a hazard is becoming part of a supply chain. Our third and final story this week takes us back to the AI build-out, and to a strain that doesn't often get talked about alongside the financial one. We've covered the AI bubble and Macrodose before, including whether the El Niño-driven carbon shock has been quietly turning into a silicon shock. This week's story is a reminder that it isn't just the balance sheets under pressure, it's the physical kit as well. Bloomberg, reporting this week, found that batteries, generators, cooling units, and other essential equipment at AI computing facilities are being pushed so hard that they're breaking down or wearing out years earlier than expected. That matters for the same reason we've flagged before when talking about data center emissions and energy demand. This is an industry building at breakneck speed on infrastructure that increasingly can't keep up with what's being asked of it. A single 1 gigawatt AI data center draws roughly as much electricity as a city the size of Boston, and half of that load can switch on and off within seconds with the erratic demands of AI training. Some of the AI campuses now planned for Texas and the American Midwest are more than 5 times that size, using close to as much power on average as the whole of New York City. One power industry expert summed up the problem simply like this, I quote, "AI does create very unusual power demand. It's like over-revving your car, wears out the engine faster than keeping a constant speed." End quote. Data centers were designed to draw power steadily around the clock. AI training does the opposite. It spikes in short, intense bursts, at times pulling as much as 50% more power than a site is even rated for a split second at a time. The result, according to the reporting, includes cracked turbines, batteries needing replacement within weeks of installation, and a warning from the US grid regulator, NERC, that data centers are now among the biggest risks to the stability of the wider power grid, with around 3/4 of data center load it assessed found to be poorly understood or modeled by grid operators. We've talked before about the strain data centers put on carbon budgets and local grids. What this adds is a sense that the industry itself is struggling to manage what it's built. That's not just an investment risk, it's a reminder that this build-out is happening faster than both the physical systems and the planet can absorb. Thank you for listening to today's show. Macrodose is a Planet B production. If you enjoyed the show and you'd recommend it to friends, please consider leaving us a rating and review wherever you get your podcasts. You can find all our episodes, including our bonus interview content, on our Patreon at patreon.com/macrodose.